Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Chelsea C. Williams. Chelsea, welcome.
Hi, Michael. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, I'm really excited for our conversation. So you are the founder and CEO of Rebrand Talent Co., a workforce and talent development firm offering DI informed retention strategies. Your clients include brands like Ben & Jerry's, Gatorade, Cushman and Wakefield, a whole bunch of others. And you're also a speaker on the topics of workplace inclusion and career navigation. Did I get that all right?
You got it right. Good
There
job,
we
Michael.
go. Thank you. Well, let's get started by going back. Before you actually started your consulting business, what were you doing? What was kind of the initial career, and like how did Chelsea emerge career path-wise?
Love this question. It's always a favorite. I went to a women's college, a historically Black women's college, Spelman, and it's a liberal arts college. So I went and studied economics. I always say when you go to a liberal arts college and study economics, you either end up on Wall Street or you end up as an economist. I chose not to be an economist, and I chose the Wall Street route. So I started my career on Wall Street, spent about a decade in financial services, always in the talent and human capital space, from large global organizations to investment firms, just passionate about building the pipeline and cultivating the pipeline. So, I would say my experience in Wall Street really was the founding blocks and what confirmed for me this passion about focusing in on consulting.
Right.
And it's truly where we worked with consultants in talent development. And so I had an early bird's eye view into the space and was able to kind of make my pivot from my foundation.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into your experience around the whole talent side. And I mean, you talked about the pipeline. When you say pipeline, you're referring to the pipeline of talent inside of an organization, right? Not the sales pipeline.
No, exactly.
But I mean, for you as well, like as you've grown, you're now a company of 12 people, right, in your firm. So I really want to explore kind of how you got to where you are as you've grown the business and brought people on, because as anyone who has employees, team members knows, like the talent piece of it, right, is one of the most challenging in terms of growing the business. So take me back to that time. So you're working on Wall Street, whether it's large organizations or hedge funds or investment firms or whatever. How did you even become interested though in the talent piece? Like you were in university and then you got to Wall Street. Where did that passion or that excitement come from to want to, identify and hire and train and develop people?
Such a great question. I really think it was birthed in my high school years, but definitely cultivated in my college years. I found myself quite involved in student government and volunteering in our local community and doing, I was an ambassador for our admissions department at Spelman. So giving tours and meeting people, people, like truly.
You're a people person.
I am. I thrive. I enjoy being around people. I care deeply about people's development. I'm a person who learning is like a value and a hobby. So, right. Naturally the ability to be able to learn from people and work alongside people excites me.
So 2018, you started what today is known as Reimagine Talent Co. What made you leave Wall Street or the world of finance? For many, that's like their life ambition, or as they're developing themselves, they think about high paying job, great benefits, all the fun and kind of, premium world that finance can provide. Why do you decide to not continue down that path and just move up the ranks and instead go off and build your own company, this time, a consulting firm?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, because the truth is, I was doing quite well in my time in finance and really actually enjoyed my firm. The last firm I was at before I took a leap out, it really came down to seeing a pain point. So at the time when I was working in financial services, one of my roles, I was a vice president overseeing human capital, really globally. I focused in the Americas, but we did a lot of global projects as well. And one of my focuses was early talent. which is, people could describe it as your intern, your graduate, your first few years out of school, just to kind of
Right.
provide a baseline. And in this role, my colleagues and I were spending a lot of time at colleges and universities in the country, spending a lot of time around what is now Gen Z, and really understanding their experiences, their pain points, why navigating through early career was difficult and challenging. And it was in that time that I realized there really wasn't an organization that was thoroughly focused on helping organizations engage, develop, and retain early talent. And so I started writing on a campus recruiting tour. We were at Penn, and I found myself in the hotel lobby, just writing all of my observations from conversations with students and professors and colleagues. That turned into a business plan. And that business plan was for College Code. We've since rebranded to Reimagine Talent, as you mentioned.
Right.
But originally, we started off in the early talent and development space, hence the name College Code.
Yep.
And it was to, again, help employers really build and cultivate this pipeline of a new generation of talent that really sees work and career vastly different than before. And so that's really the origin story. Spending the time being what I would call in the weeds on campuses, really getting to understand the Gen Z experience and saying, you know what, there's really not an organization that is solely focused on supporting, especially through a diversity lens,
Right.
This next gen. And that was the business plan for College Code, which is now Reimagine Talent.
All right. So you decide there's an opportunity in the market. You are well positioned with your background and expertise to add value to organizations, or at least to, attempt to see what you could make of this. What's your first step? How do you go from being in the finance world to actually, getting your first client and actually turn this into a business?
Love the question. I'm one of those people who's a little type A. So I said to myself, okay, before you leave, you need to have some leadway, some kind of step that you're going to take to help you really, again, explore and dive into the consulting space. So there is a program that's called Education Pioneers. Their whole mission and vision is to take people from outside the world of education, so business, legal, medicine, you name it, and position them to be management and leaders within the education space. So not like student and instructional focus, but like management and admin focus.
Right.
And so I applied to be a part of this fellowship. You should know, during my time in finance, I was always doing quite a bit of work with nonprofits, like I mentioned, universities. And so naturally, the education space was a passion and an interest, and I had connections in the space. So I hear of this fellowship, I apply. It's a 3-month fellowship, starting like maybe 3-4 weeks after I resigned. So I left with this fellowship experience. And what they do is they place you with a organization where really you serve as a consultant. You're 1099, but you serve as a consultant. You come in, you bring all your background experiences. For me, it was from finance and talent combined. And you support. At the time I was placed with Teach for America. Folks in the US will specifically know that organization that is really focused on education reform. But they put me in the adult learning and leadership space. So I got a chance through that first project to dive into consulting and to play really sit in this new space. But also, as you can imagine, being a part of a broader network to build other relationships with organizations and people who were in the consulting space. So that was really like my first step.
And were you paid for that work, or that was?
Yes, totally paid.
Okay.
Yes.
Got you.
Yes. Yeah, it was absolutely a paid opportunity. Again, you come in as a part of a cohort. Right. So, I was also getting leadership development and coaching and just that network that.
And you were doing this while you still had a full-time job in the finance world?
No, it was right when I resigned. 3 weeks later, I started.
Got you. Okay. So
but I planned it. Yeah.
Okay. So did you know that you were going to start that, and then you timed the resignation to the start of this next program, or?
It was close. I was saying to myself, I need a little bit of a break because I've been working, but when I left, I knew that this fellowship I knew I was going to be a part of the fellowship class. Right. So I had something to look forward to. Yeah.
Okay. So you had that. So that's essentially kind of quote unquote, like your first client, but done through this fellowship. So the fellowship like did your marketing for you and put you in front of the client. So now you have your first kind of paid gig as a consultant. what happens after that? How do you
Mhm.
leverage that experience to get the, the next client, or, the next 2 or 3 clients? Like, how do you actually turn that into a business as
Yeah.
opposed to just delivering through this
Uh-huh.
fellowship?
I thank you for the question. I was very intentional in wanting to be a part of this fellowship because, again, it was part of a broader network.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to myself, I go in, I do a great job with this particular client. There's a whole network of dozens of organizations across the country. And so, really, for me, I was doing the work of consulting for this client, but building relationships, let's say after work hours, right?
Right. Yeah.
Networking events, speaking with people at other organizations. I will tell you, my experience in finance, you can imagine, especially in the role that I was in talent, I met dozens of people and had honestly a very strong network.
Right.
And so for me, once I made the step, I felt very comfortable to reach out to even colleagues. There were some
Mm-hmm.
colleagues who were tremendously helpful of making introductions to universities, to
Sure.
nonprofits. And so that for me really was, that step was what officiated she's stepping into consulting.
Yeah.
And then my network, college included, and my network in New York City, I was just reaching out. I was going to the contracting fairs, that they have. I was really putting myself out there, though uncomfortable.
So I want to make this very kind of tactical and tangible for everyone joining us.
Yeah.
What did you say? So you have this Rolodex,
Mhm.
and you're a great networker. You know lots of people. You're getting introductions and referrals. What were you actually asking? Like, when you were sending an email to somebody that what were you saying in that email that was then leading you to be able to have conversations with those
So
people,
great.
and turn that into business?
Yeah, so good. Um, you know, again, I think it's a much easier. There's the cold call and then there's the cultivating a relationship that's already there.
Yep.
Thankfully, and I did do some cold calling, which we could talk about later, but for the most part, people knew me and they knew my work,
Mm-hmm.
or they knew someone who knew my work.
Right.
And so it was an initial email. I've transitioned out of my full-time role.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now stepping into consulting through this organization called College Code. Here's our mission. Here are the 2 to 3 services that we offer organizations, and learn more on the website. Would you be open to an introductory call?
Right.
And so it really was like, here's the step I've taken. Here's what we do and what we offer. Would love to move off
Yeah.
the email into a meeting.
And what percentage of people would you say who received, who you sent that email to, actually responded and said, yeah, like, I'm open to having a conversation? Was it a large portion, or was it just quite small and it required you to do a lot of follow up with people? Kind of walk me through. I'm imagining that you have this database of, hundreds of people, and you send this email to a lot of them. How does it kind of transpire, or what are the next steps after that initial email goes out?
Yeah, this is where it becomes important to be organized. I learned it maybe a year later, but the
Right.
CRM system, starting with that critical, and that's in your amazing book. Even if it's an Excel sheet, right?
Right.
Starting a place where you're organized becomes incredibly critical for the follow up. It's interesting. It's a good question. I would say 25 to 30 actually got back to me.
Right.
I mean, that's just the reality, the truth of the matter. There were many who said, I love what you're doing. Let me make a connection for you. But sometimes those connections didn't materialize.
Sure.
Sometimes it was because, again, we had a very specific niche,
Yeah.
early talent. And again, this is something I learned a few years later, the importance of really being specific in the person within
Mm-hmm.
the organization who can help me, who's interested in the kind of work that we do. But initially, I would say it was about 25 to 30% who said, Chelsea, let's talk. And this, the conversation doesn't mean that, there's an opportunity, but it was the door in,
Sure.
and the opportunity to really, explain some of the ways that we can add value.
So that's how you, with those conversations, is kind of what then turned into your second client, third client.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think about my earlier days. Yeah, it was that speaking, if I can bring that up for you.
Yeah.
Again, I was already doing speaking
Mm-hmm.
when I was working in financial services, unpaid.
Right. Yeah.
But I was already doing the world of speaking. So I had my list of organizations I'd spoken at. I'd had the variation of panel versus workshop versus keynote. And I'll tell you, again, I didn't know at the time that those opportunities were helping me build that community through LinkedIn, as one example of people who knew me from speaking
Mm-hmm.
at a panel. And so some of my, earlier consulting opportunities came from speaking.
Right.
and
Yeah.
still continues to be an option for us now.
So yeah, let's contrast like the early days. It was we call network reactivation as an exercise we take a lot of clients through in our coaching programs, because like yourself, it's very common to have this amazing asset of relationships that you've cultivated and developed over the years. And then how do you actually turn that into initial conversation? So it sounds like, you really executed that very well. If you compare and contrast that to today, right? So here we are years later. What are you doing today from a marketing lead generation perspective? What would you say is working best for you to be able to create conversations with, highly qualified, high value prospective clients?
Speaking. Honestly, and this, everybody has to, and Dory Clark talks a lot about this. You have to find your niche. Like, what is the way that you get to people? Is it writing? Is it speaking? Is it one-on-one? And I have identified that speaking is that way for me. It's something I'm passionate about, and it's definitely a way that I feel that I can educate and inspire others. And so when I think about it, especially moving to the keynote space, as you can imagine, depending on the conference or the summit, that puts you in this, thought leader space that people really, especially if it's an industry conference or a multi-sector conference, people are going back to all these different cities, state sectors. And so that has been tremendously helpful for us. And then finally, I'll say, especially in the space of talent and diversity, referrals. 75% of our business last year was referral based. We go and consult with a partner, they go and tell another partner, because the community's small and they want trusted people.
Is there anything that you do on the referral side that you feel helps for you to generate? Like, a lot of people talk about referrals, but they're very reactive. Like they just do the work, right? They do great work. People tend to get business. Not so many people are proactive or strategic. And I don't mean that like to say if you're not, that's fine. Just is there something that you do when it comes to referrals that you feel, this actually really helps us to generate more of those?
Yes, there's a few things that come to mind. Anytime we're finishing a client engagement, we do what we call a postmortem or, our final call. And that is where we talk through our journey and our experience together, and we'll share some new products or services we're offering and really listen into what's next quarter, next year for the client. We're really intentional about making sure that that's set up, as you can imagine. So that's definitely a big one. The testimonials would even be one. And again, that's something that I know you discussed in your book, but the proactive nature of getting those testimonials, because again, I didn't really know that people really read them, if I'm honest, but some people really care about those. And so there are people who have asked, can I get a few testimonials? Or is there someone I can speak with? And so us always having that ready and clear on a one pager are just little things that you might think, oh, I'll get to it, or it's not a big deal, but they can make a huge difference in just landing that next opportunity.
Totally. I want to get into your team and how you've gone about building the business. Before we do that, two questions. One, around this idea of speaking. If somebody is saying to themselves, you know what, Chelsea, like that makes a lot of sense. I've heard a lot of people talk about the power of speaking, but I haven't done a lot of that myself. What would be just, again, tactically, like, is it as simple as identifying an association or professional group or conference that your ideal clients are attending, finding who the person is that is, in charge of getting speakers and reaching out to them with a hot topic or something that is kind of relevant and timely? Is there anything else you'd add to that you feel is critical to be successful in landing speaking opportunities?
Absolutely. Love the question. Before I get into my response, I will say, be honest about yourself if speaking is something that energizes you. Right. And we've talked, and again, this is something that I know you've spoken on. It might be writing for you, right? You might be more interested in editorial. Choose what feels natural, because it's a lot of energy and prep and time. You know this. So if you do say to yourself, speaking is what's interesting to me, or I'm interested, there's so many different places that you can speak, to your point. And so I think the first thing is, and I did this activity, write your dream list. Where are the places that you want to speak? Think broadly: conferences, summit, business meetings, companies, organizations, schools, churches. Like, the list is so broad. And that's something that I learned early. You can be specific. A summit and a conference versus a business meeting versus a school, it can be different experiences. So you can really drill in on what is of interest to you. And once you've done that, well, actually, before you do that, and I'm kind of working backwards, what do you want to speak on? What is the topic and the value add that you can bring? And so I think a few things have to be in order. Your assets, your bio. If you have a speaking preview, even if it's a podcast or something that shares where you're sharing your value add, that's important. Have that organized. Your headshot. And then what do you speak on? I'd say, choose a few themes, very specific, that you speak on. So some people may say entrepreneurship, that's really broad. Is it social entrepreneurship? Is it marketing for entrepreneurship? I'm throwing all these out there, but be specific, because a conference organizer or an individual seeking to have you come and speak is looking for specificity. They want a person just like you on this podcast who are going to really give you those pointed details. And so the more specific you can be, the better.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, practically speaking, and this could be its own session, you need a write-up of what are you going to talk about if you're doing a workshop or a keynote. What outcomes or objectives will the audience take away? People really care about this because, again, putting your self in the shoes of the conference organizer, they need to make sure that you're going to deliver on why on why they're bringing you in, or that ends up impacting them in the broader organization. And so that's the credibility piece.
Yeah, I think those are really fantastic kind of tips and recommendations. That specificity so important in many aspects of business, but I think especially around this area of speaking and creating those opportunities. So I mentioned there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and that is the rebrand. So you rebranded, right? Walk us through that thought process, because you started off being very kind of intentional with your branding and the company name, targeting that earlier stage worker or talent. Why did you decide to rebrand? Like, give me the strategic thinking behind that. And where you are today with it.
The most fun process ever for business, right? The rebranding truly came out of the point that, again, we started as early talent leaders, right? We were doing coaching, we were doing training, we were doing consulting. Then we started getting pulled into support managers and leaders, managing and leading early talent. And again, my background and much of the teams was talent development broadly, multi-generational. Right. So we were doing the work, Michael, and under the name College Coach. And so you can imagine, you go to a certain company and it's like, oh, we've got these individuals who can support manager and leader development. Their name's College Coach. It's like, what? Right. So it didn't make, let me say this, we still got plenty of opportunities with our name being as it was, because people were going off of our impact. Right. But I said, to your point about strategy, I said, well, long-term, it's better now with the traction and the momentum that we're getting to go ahead and handle this now versus 10 years later. Right. And so it really was a business opportunity to expand the breadth of our opportunities and to make sure if someone heard Reimagine Talent or went to our website, they didn't stop and say, I don't think this is for me, because we're not focused on early talent. Right. And so that was the intention. Yeah, that's fantastic. So today you have 12 team members, and some are full-time, some are contractors and so forth. Take me back to the early days when you decide to add your first team member. Who was that? What was that role? Oh my gosh. It was an admin. Okay. It was an administrative assistant, and vital, critical. I will tell you in full transparency, I hired my first person way too late. It was the Chelsea show. Most consultants, I think this is the case. How long did you wait until you brought on that assistant? I waited 2 years. 2 years. Okay. Yeah. And why did you wait? 2 years. Like a year and a half, 2 years. A little bit of it was, I'll be honest with you, a little bit of it was, is this something I'm really going to ride out? Am I doing it for a few years just to see what can become? Is this really something that I fully, wanting to commit to? And that's one reason I was riding it out a little bit. It was a fear. It was a little bit of fear. And who was the second hire after the assistant? After the assistant, the second hire was helping with marketing. Okay. Email marketing. Yeah, like so kind of email, some social marketing. Posting, gotcha. Branding documents for clients, since we do so much of that, things like that. At what point did you, how far in were you before you hired somebody to actually help with the delivery of client projects and finding client engagements? You know what? At the point at which we brought in the admin and the marketer, and I started to notice a shift in that, as you know, it was a few months later, because yeah, it was around the same time it happened. That's when it happened really quickly. Once I started to bring on those people on the team, then I started to say, oh, I started to see the momentum.
Yeah.
This. And then they started, they started coming pretty quickly. So yeah, that's it. And then, and I'll say from when the time we rebranded, it's so crazy because that has even like doubled the team members that we need. So
a lot of consultants have trouble with this as they're thinking about building, their team and kind of creating more of a consulting firm model and not just having everything around themselves, right? The feeling is that, clients are hiring me, right? They want my expertise, right? It's hard to find people of the same caliber or that have the same knowledge. How did you how did you handle that? And any lessons learned and advice you have for others who do want to expand, who do want to grow, want to be able to create more impact, but so therefore they need to bring on somebody else to actually start doing client communications, client management, and delivery of projects?
Love it. First of all, you can't grow without it. So the fears are real. I've been there, but you really have to confront them because it will be a hindrance to your business's growth. I would say framework. Again, this is something else. You need a framework. Because your framework, it's your thought process. It's the way at which you deliver the work. It's the way at which it's your sweet sauce. And so I think, and again, you talk about this, you need a framework. If you document your process, your style, all that kind of stuff, that's the kind of stuff you can educate and coach someone else on. 100%. Now, they'll bring their own flavor, which is healthy in the spirit of diversity. But again, you get the opportunity to say, here's how we do things. Here's our values. Here's our process map. And it's the accountability piece, but then they get to bring their own flavor. That's been huge for me. Because again, I think about our work. We've got our workforce development side of the house that's supporting. It's basically College Code. It's what we were doing in College Code under workforce. And then we've got our talent development and retention and diversity work with employers. And especially for the workforce piece, we've had our model that's worked, our curriculum. We just had to make sure that we created our facilitator guides, our trainer guides. And, me and our operations manager do that onboarding with them when they start, but they've got everything that Chelsea built from the beginning that's been successful, but still allows people to bring their own personality to it.
Right. Did you ever feel like the chicken and egg kind of situation when you're hiring, right? Like, I'm wondering with also a finance background, how you manage that. Oftentimes people are wondering or saying to themselves, I'm going to hire somebody when I reach this next level of revenue, or should I hire somebody now so that I can take on and actually have the capacity to accept new work, or should I wait until I find the project? Like, so did you ever feel that chicken and egg kind of situation, or just wondering how you handled planning for and hiring people given your growth?
You always need people before you think you do. That lesson was given to, there's a number of summits and conferences I've been to where that has been shared.
Yeah.
And again, any big pivot or movement, you don't even know where it's coming from. For me, again, I think rebranding was huge. And I think there were some speaking opportunities, Michael, that really provided more visibility than I thought. And it's the same thing for people who are listening. You never know. That client opportunity, that speaking opportunity, that editorial, that article that you contribute to, that's going to open up the floodgates of opportunity for you.
Right.
And you don't want to be in a situation where you have to turn someone down because you don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you say, you make your own determination around how many clients. But for most people, it's just thinking proactively and having that person, ready. And what I'll say is the benefit of today for consultants and trainers and coaches is, well, a lot of people are stepping into the gig economy. You know this, right? Like there's so many people who want to be 1099 contract. They want that in a way that I don't think we've seen in a while. Right. And so there's a huge benefit of people who are looking for flexibility and looking for the opportunity to be a part of a team, but also do other things. And so the talent market for this type of work right now is pretty fruitful. And so I think that those are helpful pieces. Did
you ever, or like, were you ever in a situation where you decide to go ahead and hire somebody, but didn't necessarily have a project to put them on right away, and then starting to kind of feel like, well, how does this impact cash flow in the business?
Well, this is a contract situation to your good point. Yeah, I mean, there's a person who has signed on and she will join. And upon communication, I told her, we'll have you start to work in Q3.
Right.
Because I am hearing from my partners that there's going to be some additional things. And I know it and I believe it. And I also believe that I have the, the ability to pay her. That's very important.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
there's plenty of times where, and sometimes it's for the contractor who will say, you know what, I free up. I'm busy the first few quarters. Can I work with you in the second half of the year? And so I
Mhm.
really think it's fluid conversation
Mhm.
that you can have with people. And I'll tell you, more people are interested in the flexibility than not.
Right.
And I have also said this is really coming to my mind right now. How can you use your team in different ways? So I think
Mhm.
about, honestly, Michael, one of our consultants who supports diversity work, the projects that I wanted to put her on, given her background and experiences, we didn't start it until about March, but I had her start with us in January, February. She was doing blog articles for us and
Mhm.
helping us with some content and curriculum. What are the other ways you can flex the team for some of the things that they can do really well and that
Right.
help your business? It's just thinking creatively.
And how about your margin? So, I mean, a lot of people see that as they start building their team, if they are even tracking their margin as a percentage, right, of revenue minus expenses, right, getting kind of what your excuse me, what your profit margin is. They start to see that dip a little bit as a percentage. For you with the finance background, has that ever been a factor? Kind of like what did you see? Did you see that your margin as a percentage dipped as you started to build the team and bring more people on, or was that
Yeah.
offset by revenue growth? Just kind of talk me through what you experienced.
Yeah. Well, when you start to go contract to full time, you'll notice.
Right.
So that the W-9 to W-2 is a big one that I did notice. Obviously, to your point, though, there's the value add
Right.
of bringing a person in who is passionate, competent, excited, and can take on much of what you or others were doing, so you can show up in other ways that are value
Yeah.
additive. So definitely noticed it at first, but again, especially when I think about this rebrand that we did, we have been able to expand revenue in other areas, and so
Mm.
less of a worry and concern, because I'm seeing the benefit of
Yeah.
the investment.
And what's been the reason for you to go from, let's say, contractor to a full-time employee?
Mm,
Why make that shift? What's the best practice or mindset there?
volume. And if
Tell
I'm
me about that.
honest, volume is huge, because we have nearly doubled our partners since last year, for workforce and for talent dev and DE and I, and so that's huge.
So when you
Just
say volume, do you mean, Chelsea, do you mean you just want to be able
clients.
to have like more of that person's time, like kind of their dedicated full-time capacity to be able to deliver for clients?
Exactly,
Okay.
because much of the work example was on me,
Right.
or our operations manager.
Yeah.
If we're talking about client experience, if we're talking
Mm.
about business development, if we're, and so bringing on a person full time allows us to free up in those spaces, like I mentioned to you,
Right.
so that I can focus on other things that are revenue producing. And
Right.
honestly, allow people to do what they do better than me. I am more marketing, sales, client work. There's people on our team who are operational gurus. They
Mm.
run laps over me, Michael. And so I had to be in a place of humility, if I'm honest with you, and say,
Mhm.
you know what, I could do this, but I'm not doing this so well. And
Yeah.
it's also frustrating me. So let's get somebody who's excited about it.
So Chelsea, you've had a lot of experience in the kind of hiring and, talent workforce development. In your own experience, and especially maybe in the consulting world, although it could certainly be connected to your experience when you worked on Wall Street, what would you say is kind of the biggest mistake you've made when it comes to hiring that might be relevant for consultants?
Oh, trusting others on my team to make hiring decisions, and me coming in at the very tail end and not
Mm.
really doing the due diligence I need to do to make sure it's the right person for me. Learned it very quickly, and I will never
Yeah.
do it again.
So,
So
what's like the flip side to that? What's the better approach? How do you handle that today?
yeah, well, so a fantastic member of our team does operations and HR, and so she will lead the sourcing the
Mm.
posting of the job, the reaching out to our network. She'll do that first round and screening,
Yeah.
and even if it's a trusted assistant, they could do that.
Right.
And then when it comes down to like a final interview, like narrowing down 2 or 3 candidates,
Yeah.
we're literally going through that now, Michael, then I'll come in.
Right.
And so I trust my operational lead, my admin, whoever it is for you, I trust them to do that well.
Mm.
I trust that we've spoken through the pain points, the opportunities. And I know that when I'm going into these finalist interviews, they really are the top candidates from the pack.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, I think that's the team dynamic that's necessary, but still making sure at the end of the day, the decision is one that I am comfortable with, because it's going to, obviously impact much of my experience.
You've also talked about, Chelsea, that with the rebrand, there's been additional kind of revenue and service opportunities to serve clients. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because I know today you have 3 core offers, right? Workforce development, talent development and retention, and then DE&I capacity building. And I'm wondering, like, were these the 3 offers when you initially started the business, or are these new offerings you put out there? Just kind of walk us through maybe how the offers have changed. And then when you said that with the rebrand, there's been a whole bunch of new opportunities. Can you just explain a little bit more detail around what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. So when College Code first started, before Reimagine Talent, we were offering workforce development.
Okay.
So basically our workforce development umbrella was where we started. Most of the clients that we had from the beginning are still with us under this rebrand.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of just been the expansion of our original brand. The talent development and retention was what I was mentioning, was starting to bubble up as we started to do the workforce, where people would say, can you work with our leaders? Can you work with our managers? Can you work with adults? And I'm like, of course. And so again, it's really building off of the momentum that was there. Now, the diversity, equity, inclusion is interesting. We see diversity, equity, and inclusion important in everything that we offer. But as you can imagine, when you think through the past 2 years and so much of the social justice and racial inequity conversations that have taken place, many organizations are saying we want to be a part of the solution and we want to diversify our workplaces. And so we thought it important to call out specifically this capacity and this support that we can offer to organizations, and not imply that people think talent development and retention is necessarily this focus on diversity. So that is our newest, very clearly stated service, even though we've been doing the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's one of the places that we've seen a lot of growth. Again, as you can imagine, thinking about the last 2 years, especially in the States, there's huge focus and attention in this area, from how do we recruit to make sure that we are broadening our pool of candidates? How do we make sure we're being inclusive and equitable in our process? And then when people come to our workplaces, do we have a culture that fosters belonging and where people feel that they can bring their best selves to work? And so we work with organizations to identify pain points that are happening around culture and to help leaders and managers really foster belonging for their people.
You said something that I want to kind of go back to for a moment. You mentioned that this service offering, you already essentially were providing it as part of your other kind of programs or packages, but you identified that there's more, maybe even more opportunity for this, and then you went in and you kind of extracted it as its own, put a spotlight on it, then started to talk with your existing clients, prospective clients, say like, hey, we have this new offering, even though it existed before, right? You saw the opportunity. Is there anything else in that I missed? Because I think probably, most consultants that have been consulting for any period of time likely have the same opportunity inside of their own business right now, but they're not actively looking for it. They're just going like, this is the way I do things. This is the way I've always done them, but they're not necessarily breaking down, the profitability or the impact or the opportunity inside of their existing offerings to think about, is there something that I'm currently doing that I could just focus on and do a lot more of, and therefore be more successful? So anything you can maybe just add to that, or that I missed?
No, I mean, I think I'm glad that you brought that up, because again, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we're doing the work of diversity and inclusion in workforce and in talent. I'm like, of course, people should know that. And then the more I spoke with people, Michael, the more they said, well, do you do, even with having the website, well, do you do diversity, equity, inclusion? I'm like, well, yes, it's here. But so spelling it out and being specific, because when people are good, especially if we're talking about SEO and Googling, if people are just searching, they're looking for keywords, you know, this. And so the more specific we can be, the better. I think when it comes to really drilling in. And I'll give you this one example that I was talking about with a fellow entrepreneur. She really focuses in the career coaching space, was primarily working one-to-one and does some small group coaching as well. And I mentioned, and she was like, you know what, I really want to start doing more with B2B and with associations. And I said, to your very point, you might want to consider on your website creating a page specifically that's career coaching for organizations, career coaching for associations, and really calling out that you do offer this B2B opportunity, because someone could think it's just B2C and they might just brush you off as a particular client. And so I do think when we can take a moment, even audience wise, and be specific for certain audiences, if it's a very, insular industry or sector, that can be tremendously helpful.
Yeah. Chelsea, talk to me about how your pricing strategy has changed over the years, if at all. Like how does your pricing structure look like today compared to in the earlier years?
Oh, this is such a good one. This is the one that this is why I loved your book so much. For me, it's just every single time I work with a client, I just become more wise in this area. You never really, you're always wondering, am I doing this, the right way? And so for us, mainly what we will do is we certainly look at our we track our hours, and we make sure that as we're going through, especially for consulting and even training, that we make sure that we are pricing based off the time that it's going to take. But I'll be very honest, especially in the space of talent development and retention, the impact. What is it? What is this training or this series of programs for managers or leaders? What's the opportunity for the organization if this is helpful? And so there's a part of this where we will look at value, value add, and impact of the work. It's a little bit of those two things. When you start to, I think when people start to think about a team, I may go in and say, this particular consulting project we're working on, there's a project fee. For some of our partners, depending on what they're looking for, if they're looking for an access retainer to us as their partners, it's a retainer model. So we do have a few different models here. And then I think when you start to think about bringing on team members, well, that's where, if I have a project fee or a retainer fee, my contractors are hourly. Right. Like so, for them, things like that.
Just to clarify this, because you're talking about kind of like the balance between two sides. So you are tracking your hours, and you're conscious of how many hours you are spending, kind of your involvement and time in a project, and that needs to be covered. So that's kind of like the base, right? Of, hey, if we want to be charging an average of, just make this up, $200 an hour, I want to make sure that's like actually what we're receiving, at least that. But then we're looking at, on top of that, what is the value kind of contribution or the impact contribution, and if there is significant value and impact that it will be delivered in this project and created for the client, and that goes then above what that base kind of hourly component is, then you're adding that on to the project, right? So you're figuring out what's the win-win both for you and for the client, but you want to make sure that your base is completely covered, especially because you have team members that are delivering this, but you're also not just leaving it at that. You're going, what is the additional value that's being created? And that's the part that goes on top. So the two are working together.
The two are working together because, and I learned this in the early days. You always underestimate how much time it's going, especially, especially in consulting. There's so many times where something will pop up or there's a request that's made. Of course, there's the conversation around scope creep, but for the most part, and especially, I'll tell you, I don't like to go and if I can manage around scope creep in a new contract, I try to. Like, I really, from the beginning, want to just make sure there's clear expectations. So that's where I started saying, let me add on this extra value based off of what's happened X, Y, Z. And it's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
How are you? So clearly, I mean, your company is growing. You've done this rebrand, right? More team members. What does scaling or scale and growth mean to you right now? Like, what are you thinking about when you right now are spending time thinking about the next 12 months, next 24 months? What does that look like for your company?
Yeah, it's so good. We have been thinking about the focus of working across generations. Again, our workforce work being very Gen Z focused, and it will be Alpha
Hmm.
generation soon. And the technology opportunity that's available for that generation. And so for our workforce development, which was our college code umbrella, we're starting to get into product. We're
Mm,
starting to think about how we can take what we've been offering and put a course together, put things together that are on demand. And so that's our
right.
big kind of focal piece, because we're hearing the interest from the organizations and students we work with in the space, and we just
Yeah.
feel like that's low hanging fruit.
That makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of clients that we're working with who are doing exactly that, like develop, because they're hearing that from their clients. It's like they
Mhm,
want access to this and that
mhm.
whole opportunity to productize, to take what you're delivering as kind of like a one-to-one, very customized, and make it more standardized. That obviously can scale, and there's a lot of leverage baked into that. So that's fantastic. You're going down that path. I want to ask you as well, and especially interested because of your background in the world of finance. So as your company is growing, right, it's generating more revenue or profits. Where are you investing, like outside of the business? So I know you're investing into your
Mm.
team, you're investing into this, developing products and so forth. Where do you invest outside in terms of like wealth building? How do you think about that as an entrepreneur and
Mm.
business owner?
Oh my gosh, it's such a great question. I was talking with my financial planner about it. So, definitely for me, a home is like a big thing now that I'm out of New York City and thinking about the next steps. This is a big one that I have started doing more of. I've been investing in myself as a leader.
Hmm.
I'll tell you, I made some pretty significant investments from last year into this year, some mastermind communities
Yeah.
that I'm a part of, some conferences where normally I would have been like, I don't know if I should spend this couple
Yeah.
$1,000 on this. And I'm saying, no, 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 I need to show up and be my best self.
Hmm.
And that is honestly like a 6 to 12 month shift that's happened for me. But I will tell
Yeah.
you, my mindset, and again, you talk a lot of mindset is so important. And so this leadership development, and I do therapy, all things that make me a better person and leader
Yeah.
are all a part of my investment book.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
investing in yourself literally is the best investment that you
The
can
best.
make, right? Because
Mhm.
I always say it's like we don't know what's going to happen in the world, right? No one that I know of can actually be 100% accurate in predicting the future. So many things that are happening around us we have absolutely no control over, but the only thing that we can actually control is ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I think it's such a wise investment to make, whether it's your health or your mind or
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
whatever, right? Such a
Mhm.
good thing. So a few more questions before we wrap up here for today, Chelsea. You have a lot going on. You're managing your team, right? You're investing in yourself and building yourself as a leader, in addition to working with all your clients. What are one or two things that you do every day that you feel really lead to your higher levels of productivity, performance, focus, just, being great at being you? What are some of those habits you might have?
Oh goodness. Okay. So starting my morning with gratitude and prayer. I'm big mindfulness person, like huge at that. That's how I spend my mornings, and it's been transformational.
Hey, can you give me
Uh,
just like what time in the morning do you do that?
uh,
Is it like you roll out of bed and do it first thing with a coffee, or
Six
like just
thirty. No, I
okay,
go straight. So as soon as my eyes open on a good day,
yeah,
I go straight into. I have my little journal right next to my bedstand.
yeah.
I have my Bible right next to my bedstand, and I go right in. And that's what I do. That's how I clear my mind and set intention for the day.
And how long do you
Um,
spend doing that each morning?
oh, on a good day, 25, 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah, nice,
At
nice.
25, 30 minutes. I'm pretty serious about that. So that's
Yeah,
big. So that's one. And
yeah.
that I stand by that. Um, Two is getting out and getting some exercise.
Mm,
So the time for this varies. Sometimes it's during lunch, like a lunch break. I'll take a 45 minutes to an hour and go for a walk. Sometimes it's after work, now that it's
yeah,
daylight savings. This is really huge for me. And I'll tell you, I've fallen off in this area in certain times, but it has been such a huge mindset game changer for me to really
yeah.
sit here and do this, to your
Right.
point about wellness. And so I notice a difference in how I show up when I'm getting physically active. And so that's
For
big.
sure. Yes. Love it.
And then my final one is consulting in business is so challenging. It's so important to make sure we stay connected to the people who we love. And so I have a little reminder on my phone to check in.
Nice.
with a
Yeah.
family member, with a friend, with a partner, every day, and have like an intentional conversation with them, even if it's over text, so that I can make sure that I'm keeping, those relationships top of mind.
Yeah. Fantastic. Those are great. And then finally, a book, fiction, nonfiction, over the last 6 months that you've read or listened to that you've just really enjoyed.
This
Comes
is
to mind.
really good. What comes to mind for me in the area of books? There's a really great book that I read called Professional Troublemaker.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a really, really awesome book. And it really talks about, and I'm getting the author's name because I'm blanking out, but it really talks about this
Mm.
conversation. Levy Ajay is the author of the book. And it really talks about going beyond the grain in professional spaces and not being afraid to speak our minds, not being afraid to go against the grain. And I love it. It really, as someone who's doing the work of inclusion and equity, I want people to show up to work in any form as themselves. And
Yeah.
so it was giving me permission, even as a entrepreneur and a woman who, considers herself to be an advocate for diversity, to show up confidently in who I am. And so I love that book.
Fantastic. We're going to make sure we'll have that linked up in the show
Yes.
notes. And then in addition to that, where should people go? What's the website address for the new website that you have so that people can go and check out you and your work?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's been such a joy. Our website is reimaginetalentco.com. reimaginetalentco.com. I am also on LinkedIn, huge LinkedIn person, at Chelsea C. Williams. And again, I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Chelsea, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on, sharing a bit of your journey with us. And yeah, we'll have all that linked up in the show notes. So have a great day.
Thank you, Michael. Take care, everybody. Best wishes.